Okay, hi everybody. Welcome along and thank you for joining us today. I'm Owen Hewlett. I'm the Chief Technical Officer at Gold Standard, and this is the second of two webinars of the day covering the various time zones involved in Gold Standard projects. A little bit of housekeeping before I jump into the topics. The webinar will be recorded and it will be circulated to attendees afterwards, along with a transcript of the questions asked and the answers given from both this evening's webinar and the one earlier in the day. So do look out for that. If you don't receive it, then please do drop us a line and we'll pick that up with you. We also have a YouTube channel. If you search for the Gold Standard Foundation on YouTube, you'll see our YouTube channel, and one of the two webinars will be posted there in the next week or so. So we have around an hour for this webinar. We may not need that long, depending on the Q&A. But I'm going to present on the topic of Gold Standard for the Global Goals transition project updates, and I'll probably present for around 15 to 20 minutes, and then there'll be an opportunity for Q&A afterwards. The way questions will work, if you've not used GoToWebinar before, you should have a grey control panel with various options, including one entitled Questions. At any point during the presentations or afterwards, if you add a question in there, I'll be able to see it, and then I'll work through those questions at the end of my presentation and give answers as best I can. If I can't answer your question on this webinar, then we'll take away to respond to you separately. So it's unlikely, but just in case, we will revert back to you, and I'll note that at the time. So hopefully that all makes good sense to everybody, and GoToWebinar is working for you. I'm also sharing my screen here with some slides. Again, we'll circulate those slides as part of the outreach after the webinar. So again, thank you for joining us. Really, today's webinar is to focus on transition projects. So I'm going to give a brief reminder really of what we are doing with transition, the purpose and general approach to transition from earlier versions of Gold Standard to Gold Standard for the Global Goals. And I'll give a quick reminder of where to find the relevant documentation on the website as well. And then the main purpose of the call is to notify and be able to discuss with you some rule updates and clarifications that we're providing around transition and around additionality and ongoing financial need. And like I say, there'll be an opportunity to raise questions. If you're anything like me and you think of a question just as the webinar is finishing, or just afterwards, or when you wake up in the morning, you can reach out to us anytime at help@goldstandard.org. That's help@goldstandard.org. I know many of you looking at the names attending have used that function, and that seems to be working pretty well with one or two exceptions. And we've really tried to listen to feedback, and I hope you'll see some of that in the updates that I give today. So really, I'll start with a big thanks to all of you that have participated in the sharing of ideas and information and helping us really form Gold Standard for the Global Goals as we want to see it collectively. So as I say, around an hour will be recorded for circulation. There'll be time for questions and answers at the end of my presentation. So if you've just joined late, I'll just repeat that one more time. If you have a question, please use the question box on your GoToWebinar control panel. I'll be able to see those questions and I'll work through them when I finish my presentation. So diving right on in then, just to remind really that all existing projects, so regardless of which version of the standard your project is using right now, be it version 1 or version 2.2 of energy or version 0.9 of land use, you'll be required to transition to Gold Standard for the Global Goals alongside the first available verification or renewal event that takes place on or after the 1st of March this year. So the reasons we are insisting upon that are multiple, but the big ones really shown here on the screen. We really want all of our users to be able to access new innovations and best practice. So we've really taken the time to drill down into some of the core elements of Gold Standard and bring those up to date for 2018. And although some of the areas are unchanged in other parts of the standard, some quite significant improvements towards best practice have been added. Then critically, we ensure that Gold Standard stands for the latest and most relevant international agendas. And so you'll find in the earlier versions of the standard references to the Millennium Development Goals and the Kyoto Protocol, clearly both of which have been superseded in the last 2 years. And so it's really important that Gold Standard reports against those global momentum agendas. Without that, really, we would become or begin to become irrelevant. And I think, frankly, everybody would agree that if you're still reporting against the Millennium Development Goals in 2, 3, 4, 5 years' time, then that would look very odd when the Sustainable Development Goals themselves are in full swing. So that's a really important point. And then lastly, the one, if I'm being truthful, the one that's closest to my heart as Chief Technical Officer is that by transitioning everybody to the new standard, it really allows me to lead the team towards further improvements. So I'm sure everybody has their frustrations with the processes or some of the rules and requirements, and many of you are good enough to share those with us, and we gratefully appreciate that. But you'll appreciate that the reverse is true as well, that managing multiple versions of the standard means that every time we want to introduce an efficiency change, that we have to roll that out across all the different versions. And so if we bring everybody to one version of the standard, then we can really focus on benefits for everybody. Just to correct myself there, I said all existing projects will transition. Actually, there's a couple of exceptions to that. One is that if you're a 10-year fixed project from an earlier version and you're within the last 24 months of that 10 years, then you can transition if you want to, but we won't insist upon it. And the reason for that is, it simply isn't worthwhile, practically, since the projects are coming to a close. The other slight exception is that if you were in the last 24 months of a 7-year cycle, getting ready for renewal, then you don't have to transition until that renewal. So let's imagine you're at renewal minus 24 months. You don't have to do it at the next verification, but you would have to do it at the renewal. So if you want to squeeze in a verification before renewal, that's totally fine. We won't insist on you transitioning. So that's just a brief reminder of who has to transition and when, and the key reasons for us doing that. And like I say, we're really grateful for everybody, taking the time to understand the standard itself and bearing with us while we go through this process. And I really think everybody will start to see the benefits of that soon. So I want to just quickly remind everybody of where to find the transition requirements, and I'll just hop out of PowerPoint and onto the website briefly to show that. So hopefully you all know the Gold Standard website, www.goldstandard.org. If you head to develop a project and standard documents, that's where we introduced the new microsite for Gold Standard for the global goals. And in a way, that's an example of the kind of innovation that we're able to apply if we focus down on one standard. Now, the transition requirements, if you can see my cursor, you'll find those in the 100 principles and requirements box. So if you follow that through, then you'll come up with a series of documents in the principles and requirements category. So bear with me while my machine churns. And then you'll see the Gold Standard for the global goals transition requirements alongside a number of other documents. And then each document can be found and scrolled through, as you may already have begun to explore. Within that document, you'll see the transition template and the flow chart. Those are both useful documents. The template, if you click on it, and you can see my screen here, if you click on that template, it will download, and you'll be able to fill it out as a document ready for transition. And just a couple of other features if you've not picked them up already. The little email icon in the top right is going to take you straight to the help@goldstandard.org contact page, but you can just email us on that address as well. You don't have to use that function. And the little print icon will allow you to download. We had a little bit of feedback from this morning's webinar that the download function's not been working very well, and that the logo, the Gold Standard for the Global Goals logo, is too large and covering some of the content. The communications team are working on that right now, so you should see that improve very, very shortly. Just a couple of other pages down the left-hand side menu, if you've not seen them or you haven't realized they're there, that I'd like to share briefly. There's an FAQs page, and on that FAQs page, we have been recording and consistently answering those various help desk questions you've been providing. So I appreciate everybody who's borne with us for the time that it's taken to answer each one of those questions. Hopefully you'll appreciate that we really want to give a consistent, stable answer to everybody. So we have some questions we've been asked several times. Some of them have been unique, but it's important we give the same answers to everybody. And so in this page, if you scroll down through it, you'll find the key questions we've been asked to date, and that page is being constantly updated. The other page that is interesting down this left-hand side is rule updates, and I'll come back to this in a minute because there's a couple there that have been published already, and they're really the topic for today's conversation. So hopefully you've all had an explore of the microsite. There are more improvements coming, to try and make it more navigable, to try and merge and reduce some documents and to make them more efficient. And so suggestions to that effect are welcome as well. And I know many of you have already done that. So as I say, you can go to the microsite page and find the various links I've just discussed here. We will circulate these slides, where I've made a note of where to find the various documents. So on the transition process, as I say, you must complete a transition template to proceed to transition. So it's a project proponent-led template, and you submit that to Gold Standard alongside the verification or renewal. And a critical point here, I would say, is that it does not require any audit. So your DOE or your VVB does not require to review that document, only to confirm to us that it exists and that it's been submitted. So this is not a verification process. It's one that's directly between the project proponent and Gold Standard. It will be reviewed by Gold Standard only, and no approval is required from your DOE or auditor. If your auditor or DOE has said otherwise, please contact us and let us know, and we'll straighten that issue out. I appreciate that the DOEs are still getting to grips with some of this themselves, and so may not have picked up on that. So I'd hate for anybody to review or have their auditor charge extra to review the transition template when that's not necessary. So if that issue is arising, please contact us. So you have to complete the transition template, and I'm just going to briefly remind what's included within that. So just a brief note overall, we're very much mindful of trying to not create extra work. Inevitably, there's some here, but we've tried to minimize that, and some of the clarifications we'll provide in this webinar are towards that end. But really, the key areas of the transition template are to do a sense check of safeguards and SDG contributions. And I'll come on to how to do the SDG contributions in a minute. But really, that's the critical core element of the transition. Basically, if you were to summarize what we are trying to do with this transition, it's to have everybody speaking the language of the Sustainable Development Goals. Just to reiterate that point, the market is challenging enough, but if in 5 years' time your project is speaking the language of the Millennium Development Goals, it will be out of date and it will sound very strange to the market in those terms. So we're really looking to translate that language through to the Sustainable Development Goals. Very important point that. The transition projects will review baseline and ongoing financial need at certification renewal, and we have a rule clarification for ongoing financial need, which is a new element of the standard. And then lastly, annual reporting requirements kick in as well. So each GS4GG project submits an annual report on the anniversary or before the anniversary of the date of registration. And that annual report is a very simple document, again, does not require any auditor to look at it. It's simply a communication that provides a brief project summary and any key events to Gold Standard. The real purpose of that, to lay cards on the table, the real purpose of that is to make sure that Gold Standard is aware that the project is still operating and still carrying out the things that it said it would do. But like I say, it's not a certification event. You should not be charged by an auditor or by Gold Standard for that annual report. And you don't need to do an annual report on years where you verify. So if you're verifying this year, there's no need to do an annual report. As I said, we've posted some transition clarifications. Just a broader point on clarifications and updates. One thing we are intending to do with GS4GG shortly is to begin to publish forward work plans of when documents will be updated. So if you've not heard from our other webinars or maybe at our conference or other communications, Gold Standard is applying to become an ISEAL Alliance member. If you don't know ISEAL, that's a kind of membership body for standards organizations. Members include really well-known names like Fairtrade or Rainforest Alliance, UTS, FSC, for example, MSC are all members. And it's really a kind of best practice guide and set of requirements towards membership for standards bodies. And we really see that as our opportunity to further structure and professionalize and become more transparent. And one of the items that ISEAL is really prompting us to do and to think about is to clearly sort of delineate, define, and communicate when we plan to do overhauls of the standard. And so our approach will be that we'll set a date when a new version of the standard or document will be released. And in that document, we'll sweep up all the updates and clarifications that went before during that period. So the rule updates page here will be absorbed into a new version of the standard at a preset date, and we'll be communicating that with everybody so you all know it's coming. So hopefully that will make things a little easier to follow in the future. And so on to the clarifications. So I really want to say, and I said this already, but I really would reiterate it. We really appreciate the feedback that you guys have given us in the previous months since we published. I know sometimes it must seem odd to submit a comment to the help desk and receive a comment back, but those inputs have been really vital to us, and we do listen to them. We do take them on board. And we do look to ways to make the approach overall more practical. And I hope some of these clarifications that are coming up now will really speak to that. These you may see your own comments reflected in some of these clarifications. So the point of saying all that really is to encourage you, if you see opportunities for practicality or something that really doesn't work for you, please do let us know, because we are listening to those, we are monitoring them, and we are improving things as we go along. So without further ado, just a brief overview of what the clarifications are. So the first is a pretty big deal. If you're an existing project, we've clarified that all existing projects will retain their existing crediting cycles and not be required to switch to the new 5-year cycle under GS4GG. So new projects will use the 5-year cycle. Existing projects, whether you're 10 years fixed or 7 years renewal or a land use project, you will keep the crediting cycle you were already on. And I know some of you are concerned that your crediting cycles may get cut short. So for example, if you're a 21-year cycle, there was a fear that you might get cut to 15 years, or if you were in the last year, that you'd lose the last 2 years. I can happily confirm that that's not the case. We really want to make sure everybody understands that you will keep the same crediting cycle that you are already on. If you're a new project, then it will be the 5-year cycle. For existing projects, you'll keep your existing. And then a second clarification that we really wanted to make, and this is one that's concerned a number of people, is on any additional monitoring you have to do to convert to the Sustainable Development Goals. We want to make this as simple as possible, and so we clarify that you will use the same indicators that you are using under the MDGs in your previous version of the standard. And all you have to do is connect the dots, really. Take a look at the Sustainable Development Goal targets and identify which one is the closest to what you are monitoring, and then provide a brief, simple explanation that links the two. It should be a very, very simple exercise. The targets are very accessible. If you can't find them, please contact us. If you're struggling to connect what you're monitoring to an SDG target, then please do let us know. I would say that even though there are 169 targets, it's not difficult to identify the connections. They're broken down into goals that are very similarly kind of bracketed to the MDGs. So if you're making a gender contribution, then SDG 5 is where you need to go, and SDG 5 is broken down into a series of targets. If there's not a target that's directly on point or on the nose for what you're monitoring, that doesn't mean we're going to expect you to change or pick a new target. We'll work with you to provide an explanation. So the upshot of all of that is your monitoring of sustainable development contributions for existing projects will be the same as it is now. All we're expecting you to do is provide a link between what you're monitoring now and a relevant SDG target. And that will allow us all to speak the language of the SDGs, begin to understand it, and begin to move in that direction. Just a couple of other clarifications to go alongside that. So new projects will directly monitor against the SDG targets. So if you're a new project, then you'll follow the GS4GG rules, and that clarification doesn't apply. But I would also say that if you want to add new SDG contributions beyond what you are monitoring in the existing project, then those will follow the full GS4GG requirements. So it's not an opportunity to add 10 new kind of monitoring parameters under the old system. If you want to add beyond what you're already monitoring, and you are entitled to do that, of course, then it'll be using the GS4GG requirements. So hopefully those two categories of clarifications, the retention of existing crediting cycles and retention of existing sustainable development monitoring plan, should make the transition much less daunting, much less concerning for everybody. I appreciate there's some work to be done to fill out the template, but overall the project should be minimally affected. And really what we're trying to do is have everybody speak the same language. There's a couple of other rule updates concerning additionality and ongoing financial need. So additionality first, financial additionality, we noted when we published the standard and in consultation leading up to it, that we would work on new additionality tools. And that's still the case, but we wanted to clarify for those that are coming up to transition and those considering new project, that for the time being, we will continue to apply the CDM additionality tools as a default position. So we will continue to look to improvements. We are still closely monitoring the Paris agreements, negotiations on this topic. We are very interested if people have ideas for alternatives. Please do continue to submit those. And there will come a time when this is overhauled, but that time isn't right now. And the reason for that is it's multiple. One obvious reason is that by introducing the new standard, we really feel like we've given you guys enough to think about and a whole new way of dealing with additionality, which is already one of the most complex parts of the standard, and the one we all wrestle with much teeth gnashing and pain. We didn't want to change that right now while you're going through transition and thinking about your portfolios. So additionality will stay as it is. The other reasons are that we feel like we've made a lot of changes in this direction naturally within the standard anyway, and that we're aware that the Paris negotiations will turn their attention to additionality soon. And so we didn't want to introduce a new way of dealing with additionality only for the Paris negotiations to do something else. Reassuring everybody that Gold Standard stays very close to those negotiations. And on this topic particularly, we're likely to lobby and push for ideas and be part of that process. So if any of you are interested and knowledgeable and excited, maybe the last one's doubtful, about additionality and want to push that, then please do get in touch. I'm interested to hear any ideas or anything you've heard about the negotiations. All inputs welcome. But for now, no change to additionality. You'll continue to use the CDM additionality tools. And so the next update, excuse me, while my voice goes, the next update is on ongoing financial need. So this is a concept that we introduced in the new standard, and the aim originally, and to some extent still is, was to make sure that gold standard related finance from VERs or CDM labels or REX labels or any of the other financial mechanisms that we employ continues to be directed to projects that still need it. I guess this is a symptom of success in a way that of the carbon markets, that some of the projects initially supported, once those sectors blossom and are successful and sustainable, it becomes questionable whether they still need carbon finance, for example. We've seen some questions arise in that regard in the previous years about the market generally. I would add, not necessarily about gold standard. And so OFN was really an opportunity to explore a mechanism that allowed for that kind of exit or safety valve should a sector really get to that stage. But again, we appreciate the comments. We appreciate the concerns people have with OFN and how it might take away or cause their project a risk. And so listening to those concerns, we've simplified what OFN means. And basically, and obviously you can read this clarification for yourself, basically we're going to be asking projects to provide us with information as to how the finance derived from gold standard certification contributes to the project, leads to the project being sustainable, or allows you to continue to do part of the project. The range is really up to the projects. So we're really not looking to make decisions on this. It's really information only. So the only requirement of OFN is that you submit to us what the finance is used for, if you like. So we're not going to then decide that that's not a good enough answer, or it's a good enough answer and you can proceed. Whatever your answer is, you'll proceed to renewal. So this will not affect renewal. So the only requirement is to submit some details. But what we do with those details, is not going to affect the renewal. So we appreciate that some of that information may be sensitive, or is likely to be sensitive commercially, and so we won't expect you to publish that to the registry. It will stay between Gold Standard and the proponent and the DOE, it can be at varying levels of detail. So you could do it at cost head category, or you could do the fine detail depending on how you see it. And like I say, if the money is 100% supporting your project, that's great. If it's only partially supporting your project, but makes it a little easier, that's great. If it's coming to the end of its necessity, that's also fine. None of those answers will preclude you from undergoing renewal. So I just want to stress that OFN is not going to be a decision-making requirement that kind of stops or starts renewal. So hopefully OFN is also now a little less daunting. I just want to sort of sign off on OFN by saying, I know there's an instinct not to share financial information, or it's not easy stuff to get, or it might not be something you feel is necessary, but it really, really helps Gold Standard to understand what the finance is needed for. So very much mindful of your confidentiality. It'll never get published. You'll never appear publicly to your competitors, of course, but it really helps us to understand the need for Gold Standard finance. And so there's a bigger picture here, obviously, as we refine and improve and help to market Gold Standard projects and products, that we understand how they're being used. I suppose what I'm saying is I'm really grateful in advance to you all for taking the time to think about that requirement. And really, like I say, the onus should be on what do you think Gold Standard could learn from, not necessarily providing just information that you're kind of, you're able to, what could we learn from you? That's the purpose of this requirement. So that's really the key updates on additionality and ongoing financial needs. I've posted the rule update on the screen here, but don't feel you have to take notes. They're all on that page on the website for clarifications and updates, and you can read those at your leisure. We'll also be recirculating that link straight after the webinar in the coming days. So not to worry if you've not followed everything there. I just want to sign off this presentation before I sort of respond to some of the queries. So I just want to say what's next, what's coming up really. So we are going to be doing a review of renewable energy project eligibility, particularly grid-connected renewable energy. So I mentioned already that there are questions around some of the more developed countries' renewable energy being supported by the carbon markets. You'll have seen recently we introduced renewable energy certificate labeling, and so there's an opportunity for an alternative product there for some of those projects that we'd like to explore further, and we'd like to explore further with our stakeholders around what should and shouldn't be eligible, what should and shouldn't Gold Standard support with regard renewable energy, grid-connected renewable energy particularly. But we will do that in consultation with stakeholders, so look out for that. We'll look forward to your views as we kind of reshape and really drive that market forward. We are planning an update to the standard at the 1st of March. That will be wrapping up the FAQs, minor corrections, errors, and the rule updates I've just mentioned today. So very much relatively minor or in favor of project proponents. I think there's nothing that we propose to incorporate on the 1st of March that should be a surprise by then, or that I think should be any kind of detriment to what you already know. So I mentioned earlier planned updates. The next is coming up shortly. We're working on a number of ongoing strategic initiatives. If you've joined us at any of the big climate conferences recently, you'll have heard some of the new areas of markets we're trying to promote to give projects alternatives, to find new sources of finance, both within the carbon markets and in kind of parallel industries like corporate reporting, for example. How can we use the best of Gold Standards to support projects in that light? And I think those initiatives have a twofold impact. On the one hand, they give projects a greater opportunity for finance, and on the other hand, projects that use them naturally reduce the heat in the carbon markets themselves. So even if you don't participate in some of those alternative initiatives, then hopefully what you'll see is some of the VER, oversupply, being funded in a different way. So hopefully everybody benefits from that, and you'll see some of those and have the opportunity to comment on them. Just one other quick one I wanted to highlight. We are also working with the German government on guidelines and a risk assessment tool for double counting under the Paris Agreement. That will be coming to an end shortly, and we will lead off from that into a discussion with stakeholders on what that means and what the solutions are. So I won't go into it now, but I think Paris inevitably will cause a number of areas of potential double counting, which is an integrity risk for the carbon markets, not just Gold Standard, but the other players too. And we're working on a tool that helps to assess that risk, and then in discussion with the market, what might we do about that? So how can we safeguard the existing approach, and what alternative mechanisms might exist? So if you have an interest in that area, if you have an idea for how to solve it, or an idea for alternative products that come out of that topic, again, please do get in touch. I'd love to hear from you and involve you in those discussions. And then lastly, really a kind of sign off on a shameless plug, I suppose. If you are able to join us at the Gold Standard Conference in April, you can find the details on the website. That will be in Berlin on April the 17th and 18th, but all the details are on the website. And if you are able to join us there, then obviously we look forward to seeing you. That's really it for the presentation itself. Hopefully that's been informative. And like I say, just to reiterate, we will circulate the slides, we'll circulate a recording and a transcript of the Q&A from both this webinar and the webinar that took place earlier in the day, so that you can read through those at your leisure. And obviously, if you have any questions, burning questions that occur to you after we finish speaking, then help@goldstandard.org is the place for those. So thank you very much for listening. I'll just take a moment to take a quick drink of water to get my voice back, and then perhaps in the meantime, if anybody's got any questions, I see one's been raised already. If anybody's got any questions, then please put them in the question box. Okay, thanks for that, and apologies for my slightly croaky voice. I think I have the permanent winter cold that seems to be going all over the world. So thanks for bearing with me. There is one question from Esther. Thanks, Esther, for the question. Esther asked that I mentioned that if we add new SDGs, we'd follow the full GS4GG requirements. Does this mean that we would need to apply the full requirements to the entire project, or just apply them in terms of the specific new SDGs referenced? So, excuse me. So specifically, the SDGs referenced. So you'll continue to. So maybe start from the bigger picture. The transition plan will determine anything that you need to monitor that's new. There shouldn't be too much of that. There's the safeguards applying to most projects, although there's more detail. Generally, there aren't new safeguards applying to most project types if you sift through them, for example. And obviously you can't go back and apply things like any new stakeholder consultation requirements if you're already at year 7 or something. So your transition plan will determine anything that's new to be monitored, but we're not envisaging too much of that. And so specifically when I said that the full GS4GG requirements apply, that means they apply to any SDG contributions you want to add to the project on transition. So your existing MDG contributions, if you're a version 2.2 project, can be a simple narrative that explains which SDG is relevant or which SDG target is relevant. But if you wanted to add, say, new ones, then that's where the GS4GG requirements for SDG contributions apply. So Esther, if any of that's still unclear, then please do drop me a line anytime, and I can pick it up with you. But yeah, it really references only the new SDGs. Thanks, Esther. Thanks for clarifying. Okay, I'll just pause there. That was the only question. So either I've done a reasonable job of clarifying, or people are still digesting, or maybe a bit of both. I'll just pause briefly in case any other questions pop up. Otherwise, we'll finish a little early, and you if anything occurs to you, then please do email me. Thanks, Esther. Okay, great. Well, I'm not seeing any other questions. Like I say, please do continue to reach out to us. I hope we are still kind of open and engaging. I know we've introduced some new systems like the help desk, We've introduced some new stuff around reviews that is hopefully starting to work in terms of timely delivery. But really, a lot of that, and I say this genuinely, hand on heart, a lot of that is driven by the feedback we get from you guys. So I would say that we do listen. I know projects are challenging. I know some of the rules are challenging, and sustainable development itself can be ambiguous and difficult. But your feedback genuinely makes a difference to what we write in the standard and how we adapt and respond to some of the criticisms or some of the concerns you have. So if you have one, write to us. It does make a difference, and I promise that we'll read it and consider whether to act on it. And in most cases, if it's a sensible suggestion, then we'll certainly act on it. And hopefully you've seen that in the ones I've outlined today. And on that note, oh, hang on, there's one more question. Hamzy just got it in just in time. So after migration to GS4GG, our verification for the monitoring period before approval will still be under GSV 2.2. Yep, 100% correct. So if you were submitting for verification in, say, June 2018, then you'll be verifying under the existing version of the standard that you registered under. So that might be V2.2 in your case, or some others might be under different versions. But yeah, your verifier, your VVB, should be verifying you against the version of the standard that you registered under. And at the same time, Gold Standard will work with you on the transition template. Like I say, just to reiterate one more time, your VVB, your DOE, your auditor, apart from checking that you've submitted that transition template, that's the only extra thing they would need to do. There really shouldn't be, in my view, any extra charge from your auditor for the transition. And if you're concerned about that, if you're being told that it's going to cost a certain amount of money, then please do contact us, and we'll see if we can figure out what's going on. Okay, thanks so much. Thanks, Mamzi. That's a useful question and a useful clarification. I'll end the webinar there. Thanks so much, everybody, for attending and for your ongoing feedback. And I look forward to hearing from you as we go through this transition process. Wishing you all the best with your templates, and look forward to receiving them. Thanks, everybody, and have a great rest of the day wherever you are.